He saw a ghost on the highway, a bride barefoot in a blizzard. She refused to be rescued. But the real storm wasn't outside. It was the secret she was fleeing and the grief he was buried in. This isn't just a story about love. It's about what happens when two broken worlds collide. What would you have done? Have you ever felt a storm brewing inside you that was far more powerful than any storm you could see outside your window? A storm of choices, of sorrows, of roads not taken, and roads you were forced to walk down. For William Hartley, the storm outside was just an echo of the one he'd been living in for 2 long years. He was just a man trying to get home, a widowed single dad, navigating the treacherous curves of Route 9 as the snow fell in thick, silent curtains, erasing the world he knew. His truck's headlights cut a fragile path through the swirling white, the wipers fighting a losing battle. He was thinking of his daughter Daisy and the promise of dinosaur-shaped pancakes in the morning. He was thinking of the quiet, aching space in his house that used to be filled with his wife's laughter. And then he saw her. At first, she was a mirage, a trick of the snow and the weary mind, a flicker of white that didn't belong. But as he drew closer, the image sharpened into an impossible reality. A woman walking along the shoulder of the deserted highway. She was wearing a wedding dress, its lace hem already crusted with ice and dirt. Her shoulders were bare, dusted with snow, like a tragic statue, and most impossibly of all, she was barefoot. Her feet, pale against the accumulating drifts, moved with a slow, deliberate purpose, as if she were a ghost who refused to accept she had disappeared. William's heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him to keep driving, to not get involved. The world was full of broken things, and he was carrying more than his share of the pieces. But he couldn't. He couldn't leave her to the storm. He pulled the truck over its engine, a low rumble against the howl of the wind. He rolled down the window, and a blast of frigid air stung his face. "Ma'am!" He called out, his voice rough. "Ma'am, you can't be out here. You'll freeze." She stopped walking, but didn't turn to face him. Her profile was stark, beautiful, and etched with a sorrow so deep it seemed to have weight and substance. "I'm fine," she said, her voice a thin, brittle thread of sound, nearly stolen by the wind. "No." William said, his voice softer now, more firm. "No, you're not. Please, let me give you a ride. To a shelter, a hotel, anywhere but here." Finally, she turned, and he saw her face fully for the first time. Her eyes were the color of a stormy sea, and they held the same wild, untamable energy. She wasn't just sad. She was defiant. She was a woman who had just walked away from a fire, and she wasn't ready to be rescued. She was still burning. "I don't want to be rescued." She stated the words, a quiet declaration of war against the very idea of help. William looked at her, at the goosebumps on her arms, the tremor in her jaw she was trying so hard to hide. He saw past the defiance to the sheer, fragile humanity beneath. He thought of his wife Sarah and the promise he'd made to her in the sterile quiet of a hospital room, to never let his heart grow so cold that he couldn't see the humanity in someone else. "I'm not rescuing you." He said the words simple and true. "I'm just offering you a warm place to sit for a minute. That's all. No questions, no agenda. Just a ride out of the storm." He held her gaze, his own eyes honest and steady. In them, she didn't see pity. She saw something far rarer. She saw recognition. After a long moment that stretched into an eternity, she gave a single sharp nod. He pushed open the passenger door, and she moved with a slow, painful grace, folding her frozen limbs and the ridiculous, beautiful dress into the warmth of his truck. The door clicked shut, and the roar of the storm was instantly muffled, leaving only the sound of their breathing and the heavy, unspoken weight of 2 broken stories colliding in the heart of a winter night. The drive to William's house was a study in silence. The only sounds were the rhythmic slap of the wipers and the soft hiss of the heater vents. The woman, this impossible apparition from the storm, sat perfectly still in the passenger seat, her hands clasped in her lap. The magnificent wreck of her wedding dress, a garment that likely cost more than his truck, pooled around her feet like a fallen cloud. She stared out at the white blur of the world, her reflection a pale, ghostly image in the glass. She felt less like a person and more like an object that had been picked up and moved, a piece of debris washed ashore by the storm. William's house was nestled in a grove of pine trees set back from the road. It wasn't large or grand. A warm yellow light glowed from a single window, a beacon in the monochrome world. It wasn't the cold architectural uplighting of a mansion. It was the soft, inviting glow of a single lamp, a promise of simple warmth. As he pulled into the driveway, he turned to her. "It's not much," he said, a note of apology in his voice. "But it's warm." She just nodded, unable to form words. Every part of her felt frozen, not just from the cold, but from the sheer force of the decision she had made. Walking away from her wedding, from the life that had been meticulously planned for her since birth, had taken every ounce of strength she possessed. Now there was nothing left. He led her up the wooden steps, the door opening into a wave of warmth, and the scent of something real, pine old books, and the faint sweet smell of cinnamon. The house was lived in, imperfect, and utterly authentic. This was the core difference, the one that struck her with the force of a physical blow. Her world was one of curated perfection, of sterile beauty, where every surface was polished and every emotion was hidden. This place was different. A child's drawing of a lopsided rainbow was taped to the wall. A pair of small muddy boots was kicked off by the door. A stack of books teetered on a coffee table. It was a home built not for show, but for living. "Daisy, my daughter is asleep," William whispered, gesturing down a short hallway. "The bathroom is right there. There are clean towels, and I can find you some clothes, something dry." She looked down at her dress, now a ruined masterpiece of silk and lace. It felt like a costume from another life, a skin she had already shed. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice cracking. While she was in the bathroom peeling off the cold, wet layers of her former life under the blissfully hot water of the shower, William rummaged through a chest in his bedroom. He found a pair of Sarah's old sweatpants and a thick, soft flannel shirt. They still smelled faintly of her, of lavender and cedar. For a moment, his hands stilled the grief, a familiar physical ache. He hesitated, then took a deep breath and left them folded neatly on the hallway bench. It wasn't an act of replacement. It was an act of honoring her memory by choosing kindness, the very quality she had embodied. When the woman emerged, she was transformed. The grand, tragic bride was gone. In her place was a person swimming in clothes that were too big, her hair damp and tangled, her face pale and scrubbed clean of makeup. She looked younger, more vulnerable, and more real than she had in the wedding dress. She clutched a mismatched mug of hot water he'd left for her, its warmth seeping into her frozen fingers. His own mug, he noticed, was chipped at the rim, adorned with a faded picture of a cartoon dog. This place, with its mismatched mugs and lived-in clutter, was a sanctuary. It wasn't demanding anything of her. It was simply offering her a place to be, a place to breathe, a quiet harbor, to wait for the storm both inside and out to pass. The house settled into a deep, peaceful quiet, punctuated only by the groan of the wind against the eaves. Daisy was a small, still lump under a mountain of blankets in her room, and the world outside had been reduced to the four walls of William's living room. He poured them both fresh cups of coffee, the dark, rich aroma filling the space between them. The act was simple grounding. She sat curled on one end of the worn sofa, wrapped in a thick wool blanket he had draped over her shoulders. The flannel shirt she wore was his late wife's, and it felt like a shield. For a long time they just sat sipping their coffee from the mismatched mugs, listening to the storm. It was a comfortable silence, not an awkward one. It was the kind of quiet shared by people who understand that some things, the heaviest things, don't need to be rushed into words. "My name is William," he said, finally breaking the spell. His voice was gentle, a stark contrast to the storm's fury. "William Hartley, Lillian." She replied, her voice barely a whisper. She omitted her last name. Monroe was a name that came with weight, with expectations, with a headline that was probably already being written. Tonight, she just wanted to be Lillian. A person, not a legacy. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to." "Lillian," William said, his gaze kind and direct. "But if you ever decide you want to talk, I'm a good listener." Something in his quiet sincerity, in the way he offered presence without demanding a story, made a crack in the ice around her heart. The words began to spill out, not in a torrent, but in a slow, hesitant trickle. She didn't tell him everything, not yet. But she told him enough. She spoke of a life that looked perfect on paper, a gilded cage, she called it. A life of galas and board meetings where her own desires were always secondary to the family legacy. She spoke of a fiancé who looked at her like she was a beautiful acquisition, a final piece to a corporate merger. Today, she said, her voice trembling slightly as she stared into her mug, "I was standing in front of a mirror in that dress, and I didn't recognize the person looking back at me. It was like I was a ghost at my own wedding haunting a life that wasn't mine. So, I walked out the side door, and I just kept walking." William listened without judgment, his expression one of profound empathy. When she was finished, he didn't offer platitudes or easy solutions. He didn't say, "Everything will be okay." He offered something better. He offered truth. "Sometimes walking away is the bravest thing a person can do," he said quietly. He shared a piece of his own story, then a trade of one vulnerability for another. "My wife, Sarah, she passed away 2 years ago." He said it simply, but the words reshaped the entire room, filling it with a history of love and loss. This house, it was her masterpiece. She was the one who made it feel like a home. "Some days it still feels like I'm just a guest here, waiting for her to walk through the door." He looked around the room at the lopsided rainbow drawing at the worn armchair she used to sit in. Grief is its own kind of storm. It blows in and changes the whole landscape. You wake up one day and don't recognize your own life. In that moment, they were no longer a man and a woman, a rescuer and the rescued. They were two survivors adrift in their own separate storms who had found a temporary quiet harbor in each other's presence. Lillian looked at William, at this kind, gentle man who was navigating his own profound loss with such quiet dignity, and she felt the first tentative flicker of something she hadn't felt in a very long time, a small, fragile seed of hope. The world was hushed and white when Lillian woke. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine blanket of snow that sparkled in the morning sun. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The unfamiliar scent of brewing coffee and the soft light filtering through a strange window disoriented her. Then, the events of the previous night rushed back in a dizzying flood. The dress, the snow, the quiet kindness of a stranger. She found William in the kitchen, a faded apron tied around his waist, humming softly to himself. A small girl with a wild mane of brown hair and her father's serious eyes was perched on a stool, meticulously arranging blueberries on a plate. This was Daisy. When Daisy saw Lillian standing shyly in the doorway, her face lit up with unabashed curiosity. She wasn't wary or afraid. She just tilted her head, a gesture so much like her father's, and asked, "Are you a princess?" Lillian was taken aback. "No, sweetie, I'm not a princess." "You look like one," Daisy said with the unshakable conviction of a 6-year-old. "A sad one, like the princess in my book who lost her castle." William turned a warm smile, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Good morning," he said to Lillian. "This is Daisy. Daisy, this is Lillian." She stayed with us last night to get out of the storm. He gestured to the stove where a pan sizzled. I hope you're hungry. We're having the house specialty. He slid a pancake onto a plate and presented it to Lillian. It was golden brown, perfectly fluffy, and shaped unmistakably like a stegosaurus. She stared at it, a laugh bubbling up from somewhere deep inside her, a sound so unfamiliar it startled her. It was the first time she had truly laughed in months. Dinosaur pancakes, William explained with a mock-serious tone. A proven cure for just about anything. As they sat around the small kitchen table, the simple act of sharing a meal felt revolutionary to Lillian. Her life had been filled with formal dinners, with multiple forks and crystal glasses, and conversations that were as carefully arranged as the floral centerpieces. This was different. This was real. Daisy chattered on, telling Lillian about her teacher, her favorite dinosaur, a velociraptor, because they were fast and smart, and the snowman she planned to build later. At one point, Daisy looked at Lillian, her gaze direct and full of a child's unfiltered wisdom. My mommy lives in the stars now, she said simply. Daddy says she's the one that makes them sparkle. Is someone you love in the stars too? The question was so innocent, so pure, it sliced through Lillian's carefully constructed defenses. She thought of the person she was supposed to have been, the life she had been mourning long before she'd left it. Yes, Lillian whispered, her voice thick. I think maybe I am. Daisy seemed to understand. She reached her small, slightly sticky hand across the table and patted Lillian's. It's okay, she said. Daddy makes pancakes. They help. In that moment, watching this little girl offer comfort with such simple, profound grace, Lillian felt another layer of ice melt away. She wasn't a runaway heiress or a failed bride. She was just Lillian, a woman eating dinosaur pancakes in a warm kitchen with a kind man and his wonderful wise daughter. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt like she might eventually be okay. The snow lingered, turning their accidental refuge into an intentional one. The roads were impassable, the town was shut down, and the world outside William's small warm house ceased to exist. For Lillian, the enforced isolation was a blessing. It gave her time. Time to think, time to heal, time to simply be. In the slow, quiet rhythm of William and Daisy's life, she began to unfurl. She started helping around the house, not out of obligation, but out of a deep-seated need to do something real, something with her hands. She washed dishes, folded laundry, and read stories to Daisy, her voice growing stronger and more confident with each page. During the day, William would disappear into his small home office for a few hours. He was a freelance financial consultant, he explained, helping small businesses navigate the often treacherous waters of finance. It was work he could do from anywhere, work that allowed him to be present for Daisy. In the evenings after Daisy was asleep, Lillian and William would talk. She began to color in the details of the gilded cage she had mentioned on that first night. She spoke of her family, the Monroes, a dynasty built on real estate and ruthless ambition. Her father was a man who measured love in stock prices and saw his children as assets. Her fiancé, a man named Alistair Finch, was her father's hand-picked successor, a man whose smile never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. Our engagement wasn't a proposal, Lillian explained one night, her hands wrapped around a mug of herbal tea. It was a press release. Alistair and I were a merger designed to consolidate power. I was the prize, the pretty seal on a business deal. She described a life of crushing loneliness amidst crowds of people. A life where her passions for art, for gardening, for anything that didn't have a clear monetary return, were dismissed as charming but useless hobbies. My father used to say that sentiment was a liability. She said, a bitter edge to her voice. Every decision had to be strategic. Who you lunched with, what charities you supported, who you married. It was all a performance. She confessed that the wedding had been the final straw. The dress alone cost more than William likely made in a year, and it had felt like a lead weight. As I stood there watching them fuss over my hair, my makeup, I realized they weren't preparing a bride. They were preparing a product for launch. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't spend the rest of my life being a beautiful, empty brand. William listened, his expression a mixture of sympathy and quiet anger on her behalf. A person's worth isn't determined by their balance sheet, Lillian, he said, his voice firm. It's measured by their character, by the kindness they show, by the things they create just for the joy of it. He saw her then, not as an heiress or a runaway, but as a woman of immense strength who had chosen authenticity over wealth, freedom over a comfortable prison. He saw the person she was, not the one she was supposed to be. And in his seeing her, Lillian began to see herself too. She was not a failure. She was a survivor. She had escaped the cage, and now for the first time she was free to discover who she was truly meant to be. One afternoon, the sun was bright, and the air was crisp, and the world seemed to be waking up from its long white sleep. William was outside shoveling a path on the walkway, his breath pluming in the cold air. Lillian watched him from the kitchen window, a sense of peace settling over her. She felt an urge to be outside, to feel the sun on her face. She pulled on a pair of Sarah's old boots and a thick coat and joined him. They worked in a comfortable silence for a while, clearing the snow from the porch and the steps. Then William stopped, his gaze fixed on a small fenced-off area in the corner of the yard, completely buried in snow. A look of profound sadness crossed his face. "What is it?" Lillian asked gently. He leaned on his shovel, his eyes distant. "That was supposed to be Sarah's garden," he said, his voice quiet. "She loved gardening. She used to say that putting your hands in the dirt was like talking to the earth. She had it all planned out. Roses over there, a whole patch of lavender here, a vegetable garden for Daisy. She drew up the plans on graph paper. It was going to be her sanctuary." He took a deep breath, the cold air seeming to catch in his chest. "We built the fence the summer before she got sick. We were going to start planting in the spring, but spring never came. Not for her." He looked at the barren, snow-covered plot. "I haven't been able to touch it. It felt wrong, like disturbing a grave. It's just been sitting there, a monument to everything we lost." The rawness of his grief was palpable. It wasn't just sadness. It was a living thing, a landscape he navigated every single day. Lillian's heart ached for him, for the dreams that lay dormant under the snow. She understood in a way she couldn't have a week ago, what it meant to have a future stolen from you. His by fate, hers by design. She didn't offer empty words of comfort. She simply stood beside him, sharing the weight of the silence. She looked from the empty garden to William's face, a face etched with a sorrow he carried with such quiet, unassuming strength. She saw the husband he had been, and the father he was. She saw the deep well of love that still existed within him, even if it was shrouded in grief. "She must have been wonderful," Lillian said softly. A small, sad smile touched William's lips. "She was," he said. "She was the sun. And when she was gone, everything got cold." In that moment, standing together before a garden of grief, their own individual sorrows began to intertwine. They were two people who had lost their son, he had lost his wife, and she had lost herself. They were standing on frozen ground, surrounded by the remnants of winter, but for the first time Lillian could imagine a thaw. She could imagine faintly the possibility of spring, and an idea fragile and new began to take root in her mind. An idea of what it might be like to bring a garden back to life. The idea that had taken root in Lillian's mind blossomed into a quiet determination. The next morning, as William was getting ready for his workday, she approached him, a nervous energy fluttering in her chest. "William," she began, her voice a little hesitant, I was thinking about the garden. He looked up from his laptop, his expression guarded. I know it's Sarah's space, she continued quickly, and I would never want to intrude. But it feels sad seeing it empty. I was wondering if maybe you'd let me help you. We could clear it. Just clear it for now. And maybe see what happens in the spring. William stared at her, a complex mix of emotions swirling in his eyes. Surprise, reluctance, and something else. A flicker of hope he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He had kept that patch of ground sacred untouched because moving on felt like a betrayal. But Lillian wasn't suggesting he move on. She was suggesting he move forward, and she was offering to do it with him. Okay. He said the word coming out softer than he expected. Okay, Lillian, I'd like that. That afternoon, they began. The work was hard. The ground was cold and unforgiving, and the snow was heavy and wet. But as they worked side by side, shoveling away the last remnants of the storm, something shifted between them. They weren't just clearing a garden. They were clearing a space for something new to grow. With every shovelful of snow, it felt like they were lifting a layer of grief, letting the sun and the air touch the frozen earth beneath. As they worked on the garden, William began to help Lillian with a different kind of tangled mess. He noticed her anxiety whenever she glanced at her phone, which she kept on silent. One evening, he gently broached the subject. You're going to have to deal with them eventually, he said. Your family, your finances. Lillian confessed she was terrified. Her father controlled her trust fund, her bank accounts, everything. She had walked away with nothing but the clothes on her back, or rather the dress. This was William's world. Using his expertise as a financial consultant, he sat with her at the kitchen table. He explained her legal rights, helped her find a pro bono lawyer who specialized in trust law, and began meticulously mapping out a strategy for her to gain financial independence. He didn't just give her advice, he gave her tools. He taught her about budgets and investments, translating the complex language of finance into something she could understand and control. Knowledge isn't just power, Lillian, he told her. It's freedom. For the first time in her life, Lillian felt a sense of agency over her own future. She was not just a runaway heiress. She was a woman building a new life from the ground up. As the days grew longer and the first green shoots of spring began to push through the thawing earth, in other parts of the yard, Lillian felt a corresponding growth within herself. They were both planting seeds in the soil of Sarah's garden and in the quiet, fertile ground of their own healing hearts. Spring arrived tentatively at first, then with a rush of green. The world around William's house came alive. The garden plot was cleared, the soil turned and ready. Lillian, William, and Daisy had spent a Saturday at the local nursery, their hands covered in dirt as they chose seedlings and seeds. For Lillian, the simple act of choosing a packet of tomato seeds felt more liberating than any shopping spree on Fifth Avenue ever had. A fragile, hopeful peace had settled over the small house. And then the past arrived. It came in the form of a gleaming black sedan, a car so out of place in the rustic setting that it looked like a spaceship had landed. It crunched to a stop in the gravel driveway, and a man emerged from the driver's side. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his hair perfectly styled. It was Alistair Finch. Lillian was in the garden on her knees, her hands deep in the rich soil. When she saw him, a jolt of ice-cold fear shot through her. It was a Pavlovian response, the ingrained terror of a life spent under someone else's control. Alistair's eyes swept over the scene, his expression a mixture of disbelief and thinly veiled disgust. He took in the small, unassuming house, the rusty old truck, and Lillian in her dirt-stained jeans and an old flannel shirt. His gaze was an indictment. Lillian. He said, his voice smooth and controlled, but with an undercurrent of steel. I must admit this is even more rustic than I imagined. Have you lost your mind? William came out onto the porch, wiping his hands on a rag. He stood quietly, his presence a steady, protective anchor. He didn't speak. He just watched, his eyes missing nothing. "What are you doing here, Alistair?" Lillian asked, her voice shaking slightly as she got to her feet. "I'm here to bring you home," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Your father is worried sick. This little tantrum has gone on long enough. You've made your point. Now it's time to come back to reality." He walked towards her, his expensive leather shoes sinking slightly into the soft earth. He ignored William completely, as if he were a piece of lawn furniture. "We can fix this, Lily," he said, using a pet name she had always hated. "We'll release a statement, a temporary health issue, exhaustion. The press will eat it up. The wedding can be rescheduled." He reached out to touch her arm, but Lillian flinched back. "No." She said the word small but firm. Alistair's mask of civility slipped. A flash of anger lit his eyes. "No. What do you mean, no? What is there for you here?" His gaze finally landed on William, and it was filled with condescension. "What can this man possibly offer you? A life of faded flannel and manual labor. Don't be a fool, Lillian. You were born to be a Monroe. You can't escape that." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He wasn't just here to persuade her. He was here to remind her that she was property, an asset that belonged to the Monroe Empire. The fragile peace of their sanctuary had been shattered, and the cold, hard reality of the world she had fled was standing right there in the middle of her garden. Alistair's words hung in the air, a toxic cloud of privilege and possession. He expected Lillian to crumble, to bow to the familiar weight of duty and expectation. But the woman standing before him was not the same one who had walked out of a church 2 months ago. The woman before him had tilled soil, eaten dinosaur pancakes, and been seen for exactly who she was. She looked from Alistair's cold, impatient face to William, who was still standing quietly on the porch. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. His strength was in his stillness, his confidence in his presence. He was trusting her to fight her own battle, and in that trust, she found her voice. "You're right, Alistair," she said, her voice surprisingly calm and clear. The tremor was gone. "I was born a Monroe. For 30 years that name was a cage. It told me what to wear, who to be, what to want. It told me that love was a transaction, and a home was a balance sheet." She took a step forward, closing the distance between them. Her hands were still smudged with dirt, a badge of honor. "You're asking what he can offer me." She gestured toward William, but her eyes never left Alistair's. "He offered me a cup of coffee when I was freezing. He offered me a place to stay with no questions asked. He taught me that a home isn't about marble floors. It's about mismatched mugs and a little girl's drawings on the fridge. He taught me that my worth isn't tied to the Monroe name, but to the person I am when all of that is stripped away." Alistair scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "How very noble. And what happens when the novelty wears off, when you realize you've traded a penthouse for a shack?" Lillian smiled, a real, genuine smile, and it was the most devastating weapon she could have used. "That's the thing you'll never understand, Alistair. You offered me a brand. William offered me a home. You wanted to own my future. He just wants me to have one." Her voice dropped to a near whisper, but it carried across the yard with the force of a thunderclap. "You see, I'm not a fool. I was a fool for almost believing that your world was the only one that existed. This," she said, sweeping her arm to encompass the small house, the waiting garden, the quiet man on the porch. "This is real, and it's something your money can never buy." For the first time in his life, Alistair Finch was speechless. He looked at Lillian, truly looked at her, and he didn't see the malleable heiress he had planned to marry. He saw a stranger, a woman with a spine made of steel and a heart that was no longer for sale. He had come here with an arsenal of weapons, money, power, guilt, and she had disarmed him with the quietest truth. Defeated, he turned without another word, got back into his sleek black car, and drove away, leaving behind only the scent of expensive cologne and the silence of a battle won, not with a shout, but with the simple, unshakable power of a choice well and truly made. After Alistair's car disappeared down the road, a profound silence descended. It wasn't an empty silence, it was full. It was the sound of a door closing on the past, the sound of air rushing into a space that had been suffocatingly small. Lillian stood in the garden, her feet planted firmly on the earth, and took a deep, shuddering breath. It was the first breath she had ever taken that felt completely and utterly her own. William walked down from the porch and came to stand beside her. He didn't speak, didn't offer praise or congratulations. He simply reached out and took her hand. His was calloused and warm. Hers was smaller, still cool from the soil. Their fingers intertwined a simple, perfect fit. It was a gesture of solidarity, of partnership, of a truth that no longer needed words. In his touch, she felt the answer to Alistair's cruel question. This is what he offered, not a promise of safety from the world, but the quiet strength to face it alongside her. The days that followed were filled with a gentle, earned peace. The specter of her old life had been faced and banished. Lillian, with William's help, finalized the legal separation from her family's finances, placing her inheritance into a blind trust she wouldn't touch. She didn't want it. She wanted to build something of her own. Their life settled into a new, beautiful rhythm. They were no longer two separate stories of grief, but a single shared narrative of healing. The slow-burn romance that had been simmering beneath the surface blossomed into something tender and real. It wasn't a romance of grand gestures or passionate declarations. It was a romance built in the quiet moments, a shared look across the dinner table as Daisy recounted her day, the way he would bring her a cup of coffee, just the way she liked it, without asking, the way her laughter began to fill the quiet spaces of the house. One bright May morning, Lillian went out to the garden alone. The seeds they had planted weeks ago had become sturdy green shoots reaching for the sun. And there, in the center of a bed of fledgling perennials, was a single defiant bloom. A deep purple iris, its petals like velvet, had opened overnight. It was the first flower. She knelt before it, a sense of wonder washing over her. It was so much more than a flower. It was a promise. It was proof that even after the longest, coldest winter life could return, that beauty could grow from frozen ground, that a garden, once a monument to grief, could become a testament to hope. When William found her there smiling at the single bloom with tears in her eyes, he understood. He knelt beside her, and their shoulders brushed. He looked from the flower to her face, and he saw the same impossible, beautiful resilience. And he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his soul that he was falling in love. Not with a ghost or a memory, not with a runaway or an heiress, but with Lillian, the woman who had run into a storm and found her way home. Summer arrived and draped the world in a blanket of thick green foliage and golden light. The garden, once a barren plot of grief, was now a riot of life and color. Sun-warmed tomatoes hung heavy on the vine, rows of lettuce grew crisp and green, and zinnias and cosmos danced in the breeze. It was a living, breathing testament to their shared work, a sanctuary they had built together. Lillian was no longer a guest in William's house. She was the architect of its returning joy. The home was no longer a quiet vessel of memories. It was alive with the sound of three people building a new life. She had moved into the spare bedroom, but the whole house had become hers too. She had a knack for making things beautiful without making them sterile. A vase of fresh-cut flowers from the garden always sat on the kitchen table. Her paintings, vibrant and full of life, began to adorn the walls hanging alongside Daisy's lopsided rainbows. Their days found a comfortable, loving rhythm. Mornings still began with pancakes, sometimes dinosaurs, sometimes stars, sometimes just round a ritual that now felt sacred. Lillian discovered she had a passion for cooking, experimenting with the vegetables from their garden, and filling the house with the scent of roasted garlic and fresh basil. William would watch her, a look of quiet awe on his face as she moved through the kitchen that had once been so empty. The love between them was a settled, known thing. It was in the easy way they moved around each other, in the shared smiles, in the deep conversations they had on the porch, after Daisy was asleep, their hands always finding each other in the twilight. One evening, as they sat watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance, Lillian rested her head on his shoulder. "I used to think love was a grand, dramatic thing," she said softly. "A whirlwind, a fairy tale." William wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "And now I think love is quieter," she mused. "I think it's showing up, every day. It's weeding a garden together when it's hot outside. It's knowing how someone takes their coffee. It's staying." She looked up at him, her eyes shining in the dim light. "Love isn't fixing, William. Love is staying." He leaned down and kissed her a kiss that was full of all the unspoken words, all the shared sorrows, and all the fierce, beautiful hope for the future. It wasn't a kiss of frantic passion, but of deep, abiding tenderness. It was the kiss of a man who had thought he would never love again, and a woman who had never known what real love was. Daisy, who had accepted Lillian's presence with the simple, open heart of a child, began to call their little trio a family. One night, as Lillian was tucking her into bed, Daisy held up a new drawing. It was 3 stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun. One was tall, one was medium, and one was small. "That's Daddy, that's you, and that's me," she announced proudly. "It's our home. Home is when we all fit in the same picture." Lillian's heart swelled. She hugged the little girl tight, her eyes filling with tears. She had run from a life of immense wealth and found a treasure beyond any price. She had found a place where she fit. She had found a family. The year turned, and the lush green of summer gave way to the fiery golds and reds of autumn. The air grew crisp, and the garden offered up its final generous harvest. Pumpkins sat plump and orange among the vines, the last of the tomatoes were ripened, and the sunflowers tall and proud began to bow their heavy heads. The garden had become the heart of their home, a place of work, of peace, and of joy. One cool Saturday afternoon, the 3 of them were in the garden together. William was turning the soil for the winter, Lillian was gathering herbs to dry for the coming months, and Daisy was on a mission to find the most perfect pumpkin. The low golden light of the setting sun bathed everything in a warm ethereal glow. Lillian paused, her hands full of fragrant rosemary and thyme, and watched William and Daisy. He was explaining something to her, his expression patient and loving, and Daisy was listening with rapt attention, her small face serious. A breeze rustled the leaves, and the scent of damp earth and wood smoke filled the air. A feeling of profound contentment washed over Lillian, so deep and so pure it was almost painful. This was it. This was the life she had never known she wanted. Not perfect, not planned, but wholly beautifully real. "I found it!" Daisy shouted, her voice full of triumph. She pointed to a magnificent round pumpkin. "The king of all the pumpkins!" William laughed, a rich, easy sound that Lillian loved. He lifted Daisy up and set her on his shoulders. "The king it is," he declared. He walked over to Lillian. Daisy perched regally on his shoulders, holding the pumpkin like a royal scepter. He stopped in front of her and smiled a smile that held all the love in the world. "Happy?" he asked softly. "More than I ever knew was possible." Lillian replied, her voice thick with emotion. He leaned in his lips, brushing hers, a gentle, familiar kiss. Daisy giggled above them. They stood there for a long moment, a man, a woman, and a child, silhouetted against the autumn sunset, a small, perfect family rooted in the soil of second chances. They had run into their own storms, navigated their own grief, and together in a garden no one saw coming, they had grown something real. Because some stories aren't written in ink, they are grown in the earth. They aren't about gilded cages or dramatic escapes. They are about the quiet courage to plant a seed in frozen ground and the patience to wait for the harvest. They are about the simple, profound truth that home isn't a place you are given, but a place you build, one dinosaur pancake, one shared story, one hopeful bloom at a time. Now I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching this story from? Drop your city or your country in the comments below. What did you think of William and Lillian's journey? Did a moment speak to your heart? If you believe in second chances and found families and in the power of hope, consider giving this video a thumbs up and hitting that subscribe button. Your support truly means the world to us and helps us keep telling stories that matter. Until next time, take care of your heart, take care of each other, and never forget the magic that can be found in a simple garden. And so a story that began in a winter storm finds its warmth in an autumn garden. Because maybe the most beautiful things in life aren't found, but grown. In the soft, patient soil of second chances. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Let us know your city or country in the comments below. What part of William and Lillian's story resonated with you the most? If you believe in the power of a new chapter, please consider giving this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need a little hope. And don't forget to subscribe to Second Chance Hearts and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next story. Thank you for watching Second Chance Hearts. Your presence here means the world to us. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and keep believing in the quiet courage of the human heart.